The plane hummed steadily through the sky, a typical evening flight. Passengers were buckled in, some dozing off, while others were lost in books or staring blankly out the windows. Amidst the quiet conversations and sounds of a typical flight, a black soldier sat at the window seat, dressed in his military uniform. His posture was calm, his eyes focused on the clouds outside. His demeanor was peaceful and reserved, and every now and then a few passengers exchanged polite smiles with him, some offering nods of appreciation for his service. The small signs of respect were a nod to the sacrifice he had made for his country. Beside him, a woman sat, her eyes scanning the cabin. At first glance, she seemed like just another traveler, indifferent to the buzz around her. She was middle-aged, wearing designer sunglasses and dressed in a crisp, expensive-looking outfit. She appeared to be preoccupied with something on her phone, scrolling through it with a slight furrow in her brow. The soldier, ever the polite gentleman, shifted his focus away from the window when a flight attendant came by to check on the passengers. He exchanged a brief smile and a few words with her, his kindness and respect for others palpable. But as he spoke, he noticed the woman beside him shift uncomfortably in her seat. Her eyes briefly flicked over to him before she turned her attention back to her phone, though it was clear she had overheard his conversation with the attendant. The soldier, not wanting to be rude, continued his small talk with the attendant, but the tension in the air around him grew. The woman beside him was subtly eyeing him, her body language speaking volumes about the discomfort she felt. Her fingers tightened around her phone, and her eyes narrowed in what seemed like irritation. Others in the cabin began to notice the subtle but growing animosity coming from her direction. It was clear now that her attention was fixed on the soldier, though she tried to hide it behind her carefully composed expression. The mood in the cabin began to shift, as the soldier's calm presence seemed at odds with the growing discomfort of the woman beside him. In these confined spaces, the simmering tension did not go unnoticed, and a few passengers exchanged glances, sensing that something was off. Yet the soldier remained unfazed, still lost in his quiet world, while the woman beside him found it increasingly difficult to mask her disdain. The soldier, sitting quietly by the window, had lived a life filled with service and sacrifice. A decorated veteran, he had served his country with pride in various missions across the globe, navigating the dangers and hardships that many could never comprehend. His uniform, adorned with medals of honor, reflected his dedication and the many lives he had touched in the line of duty. His eyes, though weary from years of service, carried a deep sense of calm and resolve. Yet beneath the surface, there was always the quiet weight of the sacrifices he had made and the many things he had seen. Recently, after finishing another long tour, the soldier was finally heading back home to reunite with his family. He had left behind his wife and 2 children, who had been eagerly waiting for him to return. His time away had been long, filled with moments of intense pressure, and despite the excitement of coming home, he couldn't shake the feeling that his work was far from over. He had made it through numerous missions, some of which had tested every ounce of his strength and courage, and now he was heading back to a life of normalcy, or as close to it as he could get. As he sat on the plane, his thoughts wandered to his children, who were likely counting down the days until he could hold them in his arms again. They had endured the long absence, growing older and more independent with every year, and he was eager to be a part of their lives again. But despite the excitement of reuniting with his family, there was always a part of him that remained vigilant, shaped by his experiences in the field. His medals were a testament to his bravery, but they were not a shield against the harsh realities of life outside the military. He understood that the respect he earned in uniform often didn't translate into everyday life. Meanwhile, the woman sitting beside him was a stark contrast to his composed and humble demeanor. She was a woman of considerable privilege, someone who had built her life around an air of entitlement. Her clothes, meticulously chosen, screamed wealth and status, and she exuded an aura of superiority that she wore like armor. She had little patience for anything she deemed beneath her, and that included people. Her prejudices ran deep, cultivated by a lifetime of never having to confront the struggles faced by those she considered others. She had always surrounded herself with people who shared her views and biases, never having to challenge her assumptions about the world. To her, those who didn't fit her narrow definition of success were invisible, or worse, beneath her. She couldn't fathom how someone like the soldier, dressed in his uniform and carrying the heavy weight of his service, could possibly measure up to her standards. To her, he was just another example of the people she had been conditioned to look down upon. As the flight continued, the soldier remained polite and calm, allowing his thoughts to drift toward his family. But the woman beside him seemed to grow more and more uneasy, her gaze lingering on him, her eyes narrowing with distaste. She couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort, despite the soldier's obvious accomplishments. The more she observed him, the more her bias surfaced, though she carefully masked it behind a tight smile and a forced indifference. She couldn't understand why people like him, people she deemed inferior, were deserving of any kind of respect, let alone the honor he had earned through years of service. To her, the soldier was just another person in her world who didn't belong in the same space as her. And it was this unfounded judgment that would soon set the stage for the ugly confrontation that would unfold. The plane continued its steady hum as it cruised through the sky, but the atmosphere around the black soldier and the woman beside him began to thicken. At first, her discomfort had been subtle. A few furtive glances, a huff, a scoff under her breath. But as the flight went on, her irritation grew more pronounced. She could not shake the presence of the soldier beside her, a man who, in her mind, had no business sitting next to her in first class. It began with a low murmur, just loud enough for the soldier to hear. "Must be nice," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Getting on a plane for free, sitting in first class with that uniform. I bet they just give you everything, huh?" The soldier glanced over at her, his face betraying no emotion. He had dealt with worse in his life, and he wasn't about to let a stranger's ignorance ruin his moment of peace. He offered her a polite, measured response. "I paid for my seat like everyone else. I'm just heading home after a long tour of duty." The woman scoffed loudly, as though she had been handed an insult she couldn't ignore. "Duty?" she repeated, her voice growing louder. "Don't make it sound like you're some kind of hero. Just because you wear that costume doesn't mean you deserve special treatment. You're probably just here because they feel sorry for you, right?" Her voice grew more shrill, attracting the attention of nearby passengers. The woman's words became sharper, her disdain for the soldier obvious. "Do you even know what respect is?" she continued. "You people think you can just demand it because you're wearing a uniform. Maybe you should learn to stay in your place. There are people like me who actually worked hard for everything I have." The soldier remained calm, his expression unreadable, his posture unwavering. He didn't raise his voice, didn't let his frustration show. He simply turned slightly towards her, his voice steady. "Ma'am, I'm not looking for special treatment. I'm simply a man doing his job, and I respect you, regardless of your opinions." The woman's eyes widened in disbelief. The calmness of the soldier, his quiet dignity, made her angrier. How dare he remain so unruffled? She wasn't done. Her voice, now venomous, rose above the murmurs of the surrounding passengers. "Respect? You think you deserve respect? Look at you, sitting there, acting like you're somebody just because you served in some war. You think that gives you the right to be here? To be treated the same as anyone else? You're nothing but an overpaid errand boy for the government." At this, the soldier's hand clenched subtly. His jaw tightened, but his response was measured. "Ma'am, I'm just a man like any other. I've worked hard to earn my place, just as I'm sure you've worked hard to earn yours. But I would appreciate it if you stopped insulting me. I'm just trying to get home." The woman's face twisted with disgust, and her next words were nothing short of malicious. "Why don't you just sit down and shut up? You're taking up space where someone important could be sitting. Go back to where you came from, where people like you belong." The surrounding passengers could no longer stay silent. The tension in the cabin was palpable, and the whispers of disbelief spread like wildfire. A man across the aisle stood up, his face flushed with indignation. "Hey, that's enough. You have no right to talk to him like that. He's a soldier, and he deserves your respect." Others chimed in, offering their support to the soldier. A woman 2 rows back called out, "You should be ashamed of yourself. Just because he's wearing a uniform doesn't mean he's less than you. Get a grip." The woman's face turned a deep shade of red as the passengers turned against her. Her initial smugness had now been replaced by panic, and she began to sputter. I didn't mean it that way. He just—" "No," a man in the seat in front of her interrupted. "You meant exactly what you said. You have no excuse for that kind of behavior." The flight crew, having noticed the rising tension, hurried down the aisle. The lead flight attendant, a tall woman with a calm but authoritative voice, addressed the woman directly. "Ma'am, you need to stop this immediately. If you don't, I'll have to ask you to leave the plane when we land. We don't tolerate this kind of behavior on board." The woman's eyes flickered with panic as she realized the situation was spiraling beyond her control. She opened her mouth to protest, but the flight attendant cut her off. "No more words. Please sit back in your seat and remain quiet for the rest of the flight." The woman's defiance faltered as the reality of the situation hit her. The surrounding passengers were still giving her reproachful looks, some even shaking their heads in disbelief. Her hostility, once directed at the soldier, was now turned inward, as the shame of being called out by so many weighed heavily on her. The soldier, though still seated calmly by the window, couldn't help but notice the shift in the cabin. What had begun as a personal attack on him had quickly turned into a collective stand against injustice. The flight attendant remained by the woman's seat, ensuring she understood the consequences of her actions. But the soldier simply nodded, not allowing the woman's insults to take any more space in his mind. He had fought in wars, faced down enemies who threatened his country, and this was nothing. As the plane cruised onward, the atmosphere in the cabin settled. The woman, now deflated and isolated, slumped into her seat, a mixture of guilt and indignation on her face. Meanwhile, the soldier's composure stood in stark contrast, as quiet as the hum of the plane's engines. As the plane touched down, the passengers began to disembark, some casting lingering glances at the woman, who still sat rigid in her seat, visibly seething with embarrassment. Her earlier outbursts had not gone unnoticed, and the incident seemed to have made a lasting impression on the cabin. But for the soldier, the exchange was already behind him. He calmly gathered his belongings, his demeanor unchanged, and stood up to make his way out of the plane. He had faced far worse in his years of service, and the small-minded cruelty of a fellow passenger wasn't worth any more of his energy. Yet, as he made his way toward the exit, a young woman in the row behind him discreetly took out her phone, her eyes never leaving the soldier. She had witnessed the entire ordeal, the insults, the humiliation, and the way the soldier had remained composed in the face of such vile behavior. A small smile played at the corner of her lips as she realized something important. This moment needed to be shared. Within minutes of the plane's landing, the video of the confrontation was uploaded to social media. It didn't take long before it began to spread like wildfire. The rawness of the moment, the soldier's dignified response, and the woman's toxic behavior caught the attention of viewers worldwide. By morning, the video had amassed millions of views, and the hashtags number Respect the Soldier and number Karma on board were trending. News outlets picked up the story quickly. Within hours, the world knew the full details of the confrontation. The headlines screamed out the soldier's true identity. Highly decorated hero remains calm as racist woman harasses him on flight. The story that followed was even more incredible. His name, Lieutenant Marcus Wilson, was synonymous with courage and selflessness. The news coverage highlighted his distinguished career, his multiple tours overseas, his leadership in various military operations, and the countless lives he had saved in the line of duty. The press reveled in recounting his bravery, shedding light on the sacrifices he had made for his country. The contrast between his dignified conduct during the altercation and the woman's vile words became a powerful symbol of honor versus ignorance. Across the globe, Marcus Wilson was hailed as a hero, not only for his military accomplishments, but for the way he handled the racist insults thrown his way. Social media users flooded the posts, expressing their admiration for his strength, calling him the epitome of grace under pressure. Meanwhile, the woman, whose name was soon uncovered as Karen Sinclair, was condemned for her prejudiced actions. People scrutinized her behavior, some even tracing her history of discriminatory comments on social platforms, further tainting her reputation. What had started as an isolated incident on a plane soon became a national conversation about race, respect, and the shameful persistence of prejudice in society. The soldier's story became a beacon of hope and dignity, while the woman's actions served as a stark reminder of how harmful and utterly unfounded such biases could be. The news reports that followed further cemented the disparity between the two figures. The soldier was celebrated not just as a decorated war hero, but as an individual who stood tall even when others tried to tear him down. In stark contrast, Karen Sinclair's name became a symbol of everything wrong with the unchecked privilege that allowed her to belittle another human being based solely on race. As the world absorbed the events of the previous day, it was clear that this wasn't just another viral video. It was a turning point, an opportunity for many to reflect on how they treat others and to recognize the strength it takes to remain silent, calm, and composed in the face of injustice. For Marcus Wilson, the truth had been revealed, and he had gained a renewed sense of respect and admiration from the public. For Karen Sinclair, however, her behavior had led to her humiliation and disgrace. The fallout for Karen Sinclair was immediate and intense. Within hours of the video going viral, Her name was plastered across social media platforms, and the world was unforgiving. People began to dig into her past, uncovering previous instances of racial prejudice, all of which came to light in the wake of the flight incident. The comments section of every article covering the story was flooded with messages of disdain. She was labeled not just as a racist, but as a symbol of everything that was wrong with entitlement and discrimination in modern society. Her workplace, a well-known corporate firm, wasted no time in distancing itself from her actions. An official statement was released, condemning her behavior, and within a day, Karen was placed on indefinite leave while an internal investigation was conducted. Her colleagues and peers, many of whom had previously tolerated her superiority complex, now began to turn their backs on her. Even those who once shared lunch breaks with her began to avoid her, unwilling to be associated with her toxic attitude. Invitations to social gatherings were rescinded, and she was increasingly shunned by the circles she once navigated with ease. What had been a life of privilege and comfort suddenly turned cold and isolating. Her reputation took an irreparable blow. Karen Sinclair, the woman who had once carried herself with arrogance and entitlement, found herself completely ostracized. The world watched as her social and professional standing crumbled, and though she tried to defend her actions, it was clear that no justification could erase the damage she had caused. Her toxic behavior, unchecked for so long, had caught up with her in a spectacular fashion. The public backlash made it evident that such behavior would no longer be tolerated in a society that was growing increasingly aware of the need for equality and respect. Meanwhile, the soldier, Lieutenant Marcus Wilson, experienced an outpouring of support that was both humbling and heartwarming. Messages of gratitude flooded his inbox from veterans, fellow service members, and strangers who had been moved by his grace under pressure. Many took to social media to praise his composure and dignity, calling him an example of what true strength and honor looked like. People who had never met him felt compelled to thank him for standing tall in the face of bigotry, recognizing that his response went far beyond the incident itself. It was a message to the world about resilience in the face of adversity. Marcus's story quickly became a source of inspiration for others, and his heroism was acknowledged by public officials. He was invited to speak at a national veterans event, where he was given a platform to share his thoughts on resilience, unity, and the importance of respect in society. Standing before an audience that included military leaders, dignitaries, and citizens from all walks of life, Marcus delivered a speech that resonated deeply with everyone present. His message was simple but powerful. Respect should be given freely without condition to everyone, regardless of race, background, or circumstance. We are stronger when we stand together, united in our shared humanity. The crowd was moved by his words, applauding not just his military service, but his commitment to building a better world. Marcus, the soldier who had quietly endured insult after insult, had found his voice. His dignity had not only earned him respect but had propelled him to the forefront of a much-needed conversation about race, prejudice, and the importance of standing up for one another. His message, echoed by the applause of a grateful audience, served as a reminder of what it truly meant to be a hero, not just on the battlefield, but in everyday life. In the end, Marcus's story was about more than the confrontation on that plane. It was a testament to the strength of character and the power of remaining composed in the face of hate. His redemption was not only in the form of public support, but also in the lasting impact his words would have on others. He had shown the world that sometimes The greatest victory is not in winning a fight, but in choosing not to engage in one at all, instead rising above with dignity and grace. In the end, Marcus's story wasn't just about a single act of bravery on a plane, or the backlash that followed a moment of racism. It was a profound lesson in humanity, a reminder that respect, dignity, and kindness are the qualities that define a person's true worth. Marcus had faced hatred and prejudice head-on, yet he remained calm, composed, and unwavering in his principles. The world watched as the woman who had insulted him crumbled under the weight of her actions, while Marcus stood tall, his humility and resilience shining through. The public's reaction to Marcus's strength was a testament to the power of a person who chooses dignity over hate, compassion over confrontation. In a world often marred by division and injustice, Marcus's response offered a glimpse of hope. It reminded people that standing up for what is right doesn't always mean fighting back with aggression. Sometimes it simply means remaining true to your character, even in the face of adversity. The aftermath of the incident showed just how far-reaching the effects of racism and prejudice can be, but it also highlighted how transformative one person's actions can be in the larger fight for justice and equality. While Karen's fall from grace was a direct result of her own behavior, Marcus's rise to prominence was the result of his ability to remain calm and kind, even when the world around him seemed to demand a different response. His story became a symbol of what happens when one person refuses to give in to the hatred that others try to impose upon them. As Marcus was finally reunited with his family, the sense of pride and accomplishment in his heart wasn't just about the public recognition. It was about knowing that he had represented something far greater than himself. He had shown the world that dignity, humanity, and respect are the most powerful tools in the fight against prejudice. And in that, Marcus had won something far more valuable than any medal or accolade. He had earned the respect of not just his family and peers, but an entire society that would remember his story for years to come.